This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 182.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. I am your host, Ramsey Majaba. I'll be joined by my co-host, Benny the Beard Kanungo, when we jump into the conversation with our guest. Now, we all think as sales engineers that sales engineering is the most important role ever in any role, in any company. If it wasn't for us, everybody would go bankrupt. But we are biased. And I really wanted to talk to someone who's high enough up there to understand what they thought of the role and what we can do better and how he deals with his sales organization as a whole. And that's where Anthony Bettanin comes in. He's the COO of Loop One, a company based out of Austin, Texas. And he's been through a lot throughout his career, which he will talk about. And although he's never been a sales engineer per se, he's been around sales engineers. He's been in sales. He understands from a tactical perspective what sales engineering is and what we do. I wanted to see what his thoughts are now that he is the COO of a company. I've talked to CEOs who were formerly SEs, who started their company to do things to help SEs or help sales, but this is a completely different role. Loop One is not in the sales engineering industry, I guess. It's in a different industry altogether. So I really wanted to see what he thought about that. And so let's jump into the show. Good afternoon, Anthony. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Ramsey, and you?
I'm doing well. Can't complain. For those of the people who don't know you, that was really bad English. You can tell by my immigrant status. Can you introduce yourself to the folks listening?
Sure. I'm the COO of Loop One, which is a US headquartered ITOM-focused company.
Okay. What in the world is COO? I've heard of them. I've seen people who are COOs, have no idea what they do.
Sure. So the easiest way to understand the role of a COO, and they do vary, but predominantly a COO is the chief officer in the organization who's responsible for execution. So, generally everything that needs to happen from an execution standpoint will roll up to the COO. In Loop One, we follow EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, from Gino Wickman. And one of the concepts in there is the concept of companies having a visionary and an integrator. So the visionary, in our case, is our CEO, Bill Fitzpatrick. And he's the strategic thinker. He's the one who's always thinking 6 steps ahead, what's out on the horizon, what's coming next, what do we need to do to adapt to that? So he's the big ideas man. And those ideas then get passed to me and I turn them into reality. So in our organization, the role of the COO is to turn the big ideas into reality.
Okay. Go ahead, Benny.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, I think you probably answered the question I was going to ask there. So when you mentioned execution, I was going to, did you have a focus on the execution of activities internally versus, let's say, the outcome of those activities or whatever's happening externally? But I guess it's a bit of both because, those internal actions drive those external results and you're probably in charge of making all that. So
yeah, so for me, my primary focus is working on the business, right? So I need to enable all of the leaders and all of the teams in our business to be able to deliver the results for customers and to deliver the outcomes for them. But primarily what I'm doing is making sure that all the structures, all the processes, everything that they need in place to be able to make that happen as seamlessly as possible for our customers is there.
Very cool.
I'm sure you weren't born a COO. Do you mind walking us through your career path a little bit to get to that role?
Sure. So my career started with an Australian IT startup. So that was, sort of came out of university with a background in both computer science and law. I did a double degree and I ended up working for a company that at the time was called Soft Law that had been founded by a software engineer and a lawyer. So it was a very natural home for me with my set of skills. And started there developing what would now be called artificial intelligence systems. But back then, the artificial intelligence was a bit of a dirty word. And so we used to call them decision automation systems. So I was working as a developer, as a consultant, and that was where I got started. And then from there, progressed through a whole range of different roles within the company, was there for 10 years, and we positioned ourselves to be acquired by Oracle. So at the time of the acquisition by Oracle, I then came across into Oracle. I initially took on a role running global channel enablement, because as an independent company, we'd always done all of our own implementations. We'd never had a channel of our own. And when we came into Oracle and they said, right, who are your partners that can deliver this at scale? And we said, we don't have any. Oracle said, that's a huge problem. We need to fix that. And you're the man that's going to do it. So I basically spent 2 years traveling all over the world, recruiting and educating partners so they would then be able to deliver on the product at the scale that Oracle does. So at the time we were acquired, that product, we had customers in 6 countries, and 7 years later, when I left Oracle, we had customers in 70 countries. And naturally, we wouldn't have been able to achieve that sort of scale without that partner community. So having set that partner community up, I then moved into a sales role. So as general manager for that product across Asia Pacific, and did that for 5 years, growing the product into Oracle's most successful SaaS product in the Asia Pacific region. And at that point, Oracle folded it in to the mainstream, and I decided it was finally time after 17 years to take a bit of a break, spend some more time with my family, and I took a couple of years off. So while I was having time off, I then reconnected with a former colleague who was actually one of my first customers back at the startup, who then ended up at Oracle. So I'd reconnected at Oracle, and he'd then gone out, set up his own company, and he asked me to come in and advise him in that company. So I came in, I joined the board as an advisor, helping him with the things he wanted to do with SaaS and with setting up the sales team and with transforming that business. And then a few months later, he went on leave for a month, asked me to step in, run the company. So I was acting CEO for a month. And then when I came back, he said, well, you've done such a fine job with this, I'd like you to do it permanently. So that was how I ended up becoming a CEO. And then a few months after that, we got into discussions with a US company called Loop One about partnering with them. They were looking to expand into Asia Pacific. We quickly discovered that we were very compatible in terms of our outlook, our core values, what we wanted to achieve. And so instead of a partnering discussion, it became a discussion about acquisition. So the company I was with was acquired by Loop One. Went through the acquisition cycle a second time. And as part of that, I was asked to come across to the US and to run the global operation from here as the COO, as the integrator, with Bill Fitzpatrick as the visionary.
I'm looking at your LinkedIn, and it looks like you had 5 or 6 different jobs, but in fact, you've had 2 jobs.
That's right.
You worked for 2 companies. So.
Yes. So it's funny too, because I remember attending my 20-year high school reunion, and a lot of people, of course, ask, where have you been working? And when I said I basically had one job that whole time, but through a whole bunch of different roles, a whole bunch of different name changes, acquisitions, a listing and a delisting off the stock exchange, all that sort of thing. Meanwhile, they'd changed jobs 10 times, and they were when they thought I must have been bored having had just one job, whereas it was actually the opposite. I'd had an enormously rich and interesting time following that all the way through.
Nice. I want to go back to working with partners. Mm-hmm. When you say partners, are you talking like companies like Accenture and Deloitte? Or
okay. Yeah, absolutely. So from an Oracle perspective, obviously they're interested in the big GSIs, but also a lot of specialized partners as well, because we were a niche technology. We're in decision automation. Attracting the partners that were in that field was very core to us, as well as working with the big partners like Accentures and Deloitte and so on.
So who were you enabling in those companies? Are you working with the company as a whole, or sales team?
So with the sales team, with the pre-sales team, and with the implementation teams. So we needed the partners to be able to sell and position the product, and then to be able to deliver.
Very cool. I'm sure I'll probably ask with respect to kind of how you interact with those different teams at these various partners, but even just with respect to interacting with the partners themselves, I think you mentioned that you were mostly working out of the APAC region or the Asia Pacific, Australia. I forgot what the C can stand for. It's been a long time. Sorry. Anyways, yeah, so just out of that region of the world, very diverse cultures, just within the countries in that region. Did you have to interact with the various partners in different ways to account for any cultural differences, or were you pretty able to use
yeah, certainly, and that was absolutely a key reason why we needed to develop that partner network. In a market like the US, right, everybody has a relatively similar business outlook. But if you're working in Southeast Asia, you move from one country to the next, and it can be very, very different. And often doing business in those countries, unless you have a deep, trusted relationship that's been built over many years, it doesn't matter how good the technology is. Nobody's going to buy it because it doesn't have that very human endorsement and a recommendation. And that's very different to operating in a market like the US, where people are quite happy to embrace something that is new and innovative and leading edge. So that was absolutely core. And then even just at a more basic level in terms of language, it's one thing to be able to do a demonstration and to show the product, but for somebody to have confidence that they're actually going to integrate it into what they're doing, they need to have a local partner that speaks their own language and is familiar with the way that that they do development and all of their practices. And so yes, there were enormous cultural differences across the world. One week I might be doing a boot camp for a partner in Albany, New York, focusing wholly on government contracts. And then a few weeks later, I might be in South America, or I might be in Turkey or Southeast Asia, or anywhere else around the globe, working with very different partners who were interacting with completely different sets of customers.
Fair. How did you account for that though? Like, did you have that prior training or experience before getting into these conversations, or did you have a coach or someone to kind of help you through it?
A bit of both. So I'm fortunate that I've always been a bit of a citizen of the world. My parents are both Italian. They moved to Australia. I headed off on student exchange when I was 17 and lived for a year in Sweden. I've lived for a year in Canada. I've lived for 3 years in the UK. I'm now living in the US. So I've lived a lot of places in the world, and I've traveled to far more than that. So I've always had a very global outlook, and even the town that I grew up in Australia, it was a small country town. Over half the population were from overseas.
Oh, cool.
So it was a real melting pot of different cultures, and even just going to school was an international experience, even if it was a small country town in Australia. So part of it was coming from that background and understanding that there is that cultural difference, and then part of it was then interacting, fortunately, with Oracle, of course, because Oracle's got people all over the globe, with the local teams. So being able to first connect with the local teams, talk to them about the technology, understand how they receive the technology from that local cultural standpoint, and then have them advise me in terms of this is what will resonate with locally. These are the things that won't. This is what needs to change in the way that it's presented here, or these are the things that are really important. So having that advice from the local Oracle teams before then engaging with the Oracle partners was absolutely a key part of that cultural familiarization.
Amazing. Cool. No, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. Always a fascinating topic to kind of dive into some of those differences that exist from culture to culture, and kind of have somebody on the show that's lived a life is always cool to hear from. So thank you for that.
No worries.
You started off, like, I'm looking at your LinkedIn again, principal consultant. So you were working with customers back then, kind of like the sales engineering role, but it wasn't like a formal sales engineering role. And
So the company that I was working for, that startup, was too small to have a formal sales engineering division. Right. So like a lot of companies of that size, what it did is, it had a sales division, and then whenever pre-sales expertise was needed, they would basically reach into the delivery arm and say, well, you guys know how to implement the product. Come and do a presentation and explain it to the technical people on the other side. So that was how I was doing pre-sales activities, even though I was effectively a billable consultant, doing development work.
And how did that role change when you were acquired by Oracle?
So when I was acquired by Oracle, then Oracle's obviously a whole different beast. Went from a company of 100 people to a company of 130,000 people. So in Oracle, everybody is specialized. And as much as you might want to do multiple roles, you can't. So in the first 10 years of my career, even though I've obviously listed various titles there on my LinkedIn profile, the reality is at any one time, I was always doing multiple roles. And that was just a necessity in a small company. Whereas in Oracle, that ability to do multiple roles just disappears because everybody gets specialized into a single role. So, but once I was in Oracle, the one thing that that did stay with me once I in both the partner enablement role and then into the sales role was that effectively I was still taking that pre-sales background and using it in those roles. So when I was doing enablement for the partners, obviously a big part of that was having them understand the technology, but they weren't going to listen and understand the technology unless I could first explain the why, right? And that's a big part of pre-sales, as you know. It's not just the how, but it's the why. So why would I want to change the way that I do this? I already have a team of 500 Java programmers who can go and write code. Why do I want to adopt this natural language decision automation technology that doesn't use any Java, right? How does that fit together? Why? And unless you're able to explain that why, which is very much a pre-sales skill, you'll never get to the how. And so, so that was core in that role. And then once I moved into sales, I found it hugely beneficial, of course, to be able to effectively, do my own pre-sales. I could walk into any meeting or I could meet somebody at lunchtime and literally halfway through lunch, open up my laptop, jump into a demo, and they would just be amazed. And it was a really powerful thing, actually, because one of the selling points of our technology was saying how simple it was to use, right? That you didn't need to have people who were technical to be able to create and craft these natural language rules that were the basis of that decision automation system. And so because people were then at that point looking at me as a sales guy, and when you're a sales guy, people often assume you're non-technical, to be able to basically build a running system in front of their eyes in a few minutes was very much proof of the position I was taking, saying this can really be done by people who are non-technical.
Was it proof that it could be done by people non-technical? Was it proof that you are very technical?
Well, that was what was happening behind the scenes. Yes, I was very technical, but absolutely, we had people in our team who were non-technical who were able to do it. So,
all right. So there's something that I like when I talk to other sales engineers, we think we're the end all be all of everything. Salespeople wouldn't be able to do anything without us. Customers would fail, and the whole civilizations would fall if it wasn't for us. Now that you're a COO and you see the whole view of a company, because we don't see everything, what is your view of sales engineering?
My view is I absolutely agree for a large number of companies. Right? There are some companies that are selling products that are so simple to grasp that pre-sales is actually not very important for those. But in the industries that I've always worked in, that's been crucial, and certainly in the one that I'm in now. So we've got a global pre-sales team of about half a dozen people here at Loop One, which it doesn't sound like a big team, but when you consider that we're only 100 people globally, 6% of the company, that's actually a really large proportion of pre-sales. And for us, that's crucial because we need to be telling the story to the customers, because what we're selling now is a better IT operations management experience for those customers. It's the ability for them to move with us on a maturity journey through IT operations management so that they are getting better at what they're doing, so that they're reducing their risks, so that they're able to resolve issues that come up more quickly. And being able to tell that story and being able to show that is a crucial pre-sales skill. And without the pre-sales folks within the company, we wouldn't be able to do that. So, I can take my best salesperson and put them onto an opportunity, but if that's an opportunity of sort of any reasonable size and complexity, I know that there is no way that they can close that deal and win over new stakeholders to the value that Loop One delivers without the pre-sales people there to tell both the why and the how.
I guess just speaking about the why, especially, I mean, you've been in the game for quite some time, or for a little bit of time at least. Has that always been something that you've, I guess, recognized as something that is really important to convey that why to be able to get to the how, or did that take some time to get there? And if the latter, or if it did take some time, did you ever face any friction when you ever tried to introduce the importance of the why to people that weren't used to it?
Yeah, so I was fortunate that the nature of our technology, it was, you had to start with the why. You really didn't have an option because we were taking such a radically different approach. So, so as a startup, the technology that we developed, the way we were doing things, it was different to anybody else on the globe. And for 10 years, normally if you do that, somebody else comes along and starts emulating your approach. For us, we were so different. We were so far from the curve that even over that whole 10 years, nobody replicated what we did. Amazing. So on the one hand, that's great because you've got something really unique and really differentiated. I never walked out of a meeting with a customer saying, "Oh, well, your stuff seems just like X, Y, and Z that we've already seen." That was never a problem. So that's why the why was so crucial. It was easy to get them to accept that our stuff was different, but the hard part was getting them to accept why they needed it and why they should move out of their comfort zone and change the way that they'd always developed their IT systems and the way that they'd always structured their teams so that they could then work in a different manner. And because our technology was designed to bring together very much the technical folks and the non-technical folks and get them speaking a common language, because it was targeted at systems that required a deep level of contextual understanding of the business rules, right, of the actual core of what that organization did from a non-IT perspective. That was essential for the way that we were able to tell the story.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of cool how it's almost forced upon just by the nature of the business and the nature of the industry. That's kind of cool that was almost the only path to go and happened to be the path that's most transferable across the road.
Yeah. So then, of course, years later, you start listening to people like Simon Sinek or the power of why and concepts like this, and you sort of go, "Oh, hold on, that's I just thought that was normal, but actually it's not." So
that's awesome.
Going back to sales engineering, you mentioned that it's important. A lot of times, at least in the companies that I've worked with, there's friction between sales engineering and sales, especially in smaller companies, because the roles might not be defined or there might be expected to do too much. How do you see that relationship? And
so and a common friction point there is, of course, that some salespeople want to tell the customer whatever the customer wants to hear to get the deal over the line. And pre-sales people, of course, want to tell the customer what's real about the product. And there's certainly a very natural tension there between those two approaches. The pre-sales people absolutely have to be aligned with the delivery organization. So in my role as COO, that's one of the crucial things that I do to ensure that the way that our pre-sales team works is aligned with the way that our delivery people are then going to deliver the outcome. Because there's no point our pre-sales people saying, "Well, we can go and do all this for you, and this is what the outcome you'll get," and then handing that over to the delivery team and having the delivery team say, "No, that can't be done. Right? That's not feasible," or that sort of thing, right? So
that never happens.
No, of course. So it's absolutely crucial that those two are aligned. And once you've got alignment there, then basically sales just has to toe that line. Okay, because if you've got the pre-sales people and the delivery people agreeing, yes, this is what can be done, no, that's what can't be done, then it's up to the salesperson to exercise their skills and sell what's realistic and what can be there, rather than just spinning a story to have the deal close.
That makes sense. So just a quick question, since you did mention a little bit earlier, let's say at Oracle, for example, after having been used to so many different roles, then you go to a company that has so many people that people are far more focused. And even just thinking, sales engineers being in such positions where you're so in touch with so many other things going on in an organization, it could be very natural for them to perhaps overstep their bounds, perhaps in a larger organization, to do more than what they're mandated to do. Having gone through that experience somewhat, do you ever run across that within your own organization where you have employees, SEs, or otherwise that I guess maybe want more responsibility than what may be best for the business? And if so, how do you ever reconcile that, like being the leader and being the one in charge of everything in operation? How do you do that?
And yeah, sometimes SEs will will look at what delivery is doing and say, oh, it could be done better, it could be done faster, it could be done in this more efficient way. And that can cause friction. And yes, that is a challenge. One of the ways that we address that at Loop One is that we actually have a flow between those teams. So, we have the opportunity for the pre-sales people to actually step back into service delivery and deliver customer engagements from time to time. And that has, a few benefits. One, it keeps them very current on their skills. Often people that move into pre-sales are the top of their game when it comes to, being part of those technical delivery teams. But after they've been away from that for a few years, their knowledge is not necessarily current, right? The products, the underlying products, the approaches, the adjacent technologies, all those things may have moved on. And if that person's been busy, fully focused on pre-sales, they may not recognize all of those shifts. And an organization like Oracle, that chasm can become quite large. Here at Loop One, key for me to ensure that chasm doesn't exist, and having that cycling between the teams and that close collaboration between the teams to ensure that one, the pre-sales knowledge is current, and two, that it's realistic in terms of the way that the delivery is done is crucial to the success of Loop One.
Really, I can only imagine.
So how do you enable your sales engineering team to get better? The reason I'm asking, sometimes sales engineering kind of like takes a back seat to sales. We've attended sales training, challenger, solution selling, and all that. And no one's ever paid for me to take a course with Chris White or John Kerr or Peter Cohen. I kind of have to do everything on my own. There is no coaching, nothing like that. How is it that smaller companies tend to do better at that than bigger companies? And what do you guys do to help your SEs?
Yeah, well, part of the challenge there, Ramsey, is everybody assumes that an SE is a superstar and doesn't require any coaching. So that's because they're often coming in after having been the experts on the delivery side. Sometimes there is a tendency for people to just assume that they know how to do it. But everybody in every organization needs to be coached, right? There's nobody who is the best version of who they can be in a business environment. Everybody's got room to improve and grow. And so at Loop One, again, coming back to the EOS model, one of the things that's core to that is the way that the managers interact with the employees, the way that they work together to set the quarterly rocks, which are the goals for how that person's going to develop, and how that all fits together to ensure that person can continue to develop their skills. So for an SE, it might be something as simple as, hey, here's a new product that we're going to be going out and selling. We need to get you across this technically. Or it might be something completely different. It might be that person is completely across everything technical, but they don't know how to tell a story. Okay, they might be able to go and do the facts and features of a product, but they can't explain the why. And and it's being able to connect in with a customer, connect in with their business outcomes and their priorities. That is both the most crucial and the most rare skill for SEs. Sometimes SEs can get complacent, knowing that they are technically very good, and they can sometimes get stuck into a bit of a rut of just presenting the same material in the same way without tailoring it to an audience. And so and it's that tailoring to the audience. It's the ability to pick and choose the right case study, the right example, or the right aspect of it that is going to resonate with your particular audience. And it's not just based on industry or company. It can come down to who's actually in the room. And part of the coaching that I always give in SE is, if you're going to present to somebody, find out who they are, right? Find out what their background is, and then find something that you're going to connect to in your presentation that relates directly to their experience. So that it's both resonating with them and it's inviting them from a point of knowledge to dive in and ask you really challenging questions about the product and the service and what you're offering. Because the more empowered the audience feels to challenge what the SE is saying, the more valuable that time is going to be.
So I'm coaching a sales engineer right now, separately, and she has a problem where her salesperson never tells her who's going to be in the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
How would you offer a recommendation or to get past that?
Well, I would recommend that you, as the SE manager, have a conversation with that salesperson and explain the importance of understanding who is in the room and understanding the objectives of that presentation, rather than just treating the SE as the demo dolly. Okay, I have very little tolerance for a sales team that just sort of goes, okay, right, we need demo of X. Wheel in SE, right? SE present this, wheel out SE. No, that's not a recipe for success. The SE needs to be properly briefed, and the SE needs to then respond to that, right? The SE can't just sort of nod their head and go, oh, yeah, you've told me all this stuff, now I'm just going to present the same thing anyway, right? The SE needs to be, one of the core skills for an SE is the ability to think on their feet and to adapt and to adjust to the conversation as it unfolds.
To clarify, she that person doesn't report to me. She works at a different company, or that person works at a different company. I'm just coaching her externally. But yeah,
okay. Well, in that case, I would encourage you to encourage her to speak to her SE manager to have a conversation across with the sales team.
That's pretty much what we did to some extent. It's a startup, so okay. Thanks for that information. Benny, you had a long question down here. Did you want to ask?
Sure did. Yeah, bear with me, please. So obviously through this call, you've obviously expressed a very good sense as to what needs to go on in an organization, both very much on the ground as well at a pretty high level, clearly, being in your position and all. Being a C-suite executive, especially, and having that knowledge as to how things can or maybe should be run down low, do you ever feel tempted to maybe get your hands dirty and really get into the nitty-gritty of things, or is that within your mandate as a COO? And if not, how do you keep yourself at such a high level, as you need to be, or do you just trust your organizational structure to do its thing? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah, I'm always tempted to get involved. I've always been somebody who's rolled up their sleeves and helped out. But the way that I measure that now in a COO role is in terms of the opportunity cost. So if I was to do that and I was to get involved, then what's the opportunity cost? And that's measured in a couple of ways. So one is in terms of my time. Could that time actually be better spent doing something that's more strategic for the business? Could it be better spent fixing something that's much more systematic? Or could it be better spent in some sort of coaching or development activity so that those teams don't require my assistance in that way? The other opportunity cost to look at is that if I'm doing that, am I depriving that person's manager of an opportunity to develop their own management skills in helping that person through that challenge or in that preparation or that sort of thing? So there's a fine balance there between not wanting to leave people to sort of flounder on their own and feel unsupported, but at the same time ensuring that people are empowered to be able to affect the change that they need to make within their own teams and divisions.
Makes sense. Such a good way. Sorry, go ahead.
It's like a parent when their child is trying to learn to do something and they get frustrated with them. It's just like, no, never mind, I'll do it myself. And they do it. And then the child, let's say it's cooking. The child goes to university and now doesn't know how to cook anything and it keeps ordering out and becomes unhealthy. I'm not saying it'll be to that extent, but it's kind of like we kind of have to suffer through people learning or fumbling and making mistakes and us gritting our teeth for them to get better at what they do. And if you don't make mistakes, they'll never learn anyways. At least that's what I've been told. So.
Yeah, for sure. And in my role as COO, building capacity in the organization is a key thing, right? Because if I can't get the organization to scale and to deliver things in a repeatable way, then I've failed in my job. I'm not interested in the hero model where there are, a small number of people in the organization who are constantly coming in and rescuing the situation because they know everything about everything. You'll never scale a successful company that way. And there is certainly, particularly in the IT industry, a huge temptation towards the hero model. And it's something I'm very vigilant about to identify. And if I see it happening, it's like, okay, well, if this person is having to step in and be the hero so frequently, what are we doing wrong systematically? Okay. Or what do we need? How do we need to redirect that person? Can we get that person to actually spend more time coaching and less time helping? Can we get that person to run training programs? Can we get them to record videos? Can we get them to do something else that's going to spread their knowledge and have a multiplier effect rather than just, staying up late and being the hero?
Yeah. And if they leave the company for some other company, then you're in big trouble because no one else learned. Yeah,
absolutely.
I see, it's a pet peeve of mine. I see a lot of companies misusing their sales engineering resources or treating them as second-rate citizens, as maybe technical resources to do whatever the salespeople ask them to do. What advice would you have for the C-suite about how they can use their SEs to better their company?
Sure. So, one basic piece of advice there is just structural, in that it's important that the pre-sales team has a manager and that manager is at the same level as the sales manager. Right? So don't have that person reporting into the sales manager, have them as a peer of the sales manager. Because setting up that peer relationship is essential to resolving the inevitable tension that comes between those teams. And at that same peer level needs to be the service delivery manager. Because again, that tension we spoke about earlier between pre-sales and service delivery, that needs to come up and be resolved at that management level. And by all means, we encourage all the individual contributors to surface those problems. But unless you've got those managers collaborating and being respectful between the teams, it's a hard challenge for the individual contributors.
I need to introduce you to my bosses.
Certainly, Ramsey. Happy to help.
So we have the sales engineering team reporting to an SE manager. That's a new development. We used to report to the sales director directly. Now the sales manager reports to the sales director. So we didn't change much. But Benny, you had a question.
So what I've found is that where sales engineering reports into sales, then the prioritization is typically wrong. Okay, because they will just get pushed into very short-term activities that are related to deal closure. And there's very little ability for that pre-sales team to do things more strategically or to improve processes and approaches. And that's why it's important that you have not just the right SEs, but you have the right SE manager.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you ever have to deal with conflict yourself between these two teams, and how did you deal with that, or how did you mitigate, or not how did you mitigate it, but how'd you handle it if you did?
Oh, absolutely. It's natural in any company in our environment that sort of tension will exist. As I mentioned, the SEs will sometimes feel like, well, actually, delivery, could be doing things in a different way that's going to be better, faster, cheaper, more efficient, and not necessarily understanding all the nuance involved at when you're actually playing with production systems rather than just doing a demo. Likewise, that tension between SEs and sales in terms of there has to be a balance between following the sales strategy for that particular account, but at the same time ensuring that sales strategy is based on reality, and that reality is then grounded back to what the service delivery team can deliver. So absolutely, I've counted that many times, and just like any other friction in any other business environment, I just handle it in a very objective way, right? You bring people together, you identify what the problem is, you identify the perspectives, you then bring people to collaborate to find out the solutions. And if necessary, you have people working across teams, right? So if, for example, that SE manager is convinced that actually there's a way better way to deliver things, it's like, okay, well, why don't we pilot this on a real project, right? Let's actually have you go and deliver this, and we'll see it, we'll trial it, right? And if that person is right, then great, okay, we roll it out to the service delivery team. And if that person is wrong, then they've learned from that experience, right? And you're removing that point of friction. So either way, you're going to win when you take that approach, and that's where that sharing of knowledge between the teams becomes so crucial.
That's interesting. A lot of companies are afraid to try something different because they're afraid of losing a deal or something like that. So how do you mitigate that aspect of it?
Sorry, Ramsey, my headphone cut out there. Could you repeat that?
Sure. I was saying, like, some companies are afraid of trying new things because they don't want to lose a deal. They're afraid of something bad happening when they're trying a new process. How do you mitigate that?
So that's a difficult question for me to answer, because I'm always more afraid of doing the same thing rather than doing something differently. I'm afraid of, again, this was kind of forced on me from the startup I was in, because we were always doing things so differently to everybody else. We were constantly changing and adapting just to stay alive. It was a really fast moving sort of environment. We were constantly having to innovate, and the whole notion of just falling into a pattern where you're doing the same thing over and over terrifies me. It's like, well, how can you possibly keep ahead of things if you're taking such a pattern-based approach? So I'm always looking for how can things be improved, whether that's a process or a product or an approach or a pitch or an explanation or whatever it is. I'm always looking to go, okay, we've got it to here. How do we make it better? How do we improve it again? How do we keep lifting this up? Because if we stay still, everybody else is going to rush past.
It's like, instead of always be closing, it's always be tweaking.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Right. I think it's time to move on to the not so fire round. We're coming to the end of our time. So these are the same 4 questions we ask almost every guest, and we wanted to run them by you. Usually Benny starts us off.
Yes, sir. So Anthony, thanks so much for sharing everything that you have during this call and giving all the insights that you have. What do you love most, would you say, about being a C-level executive?
What I love most about being a C-level executive is the challenge of the role and being able to make decisions that have significant impact, and the ability to bring together people to resolve those issues. So I have the entire company reporting into me, and then I report into the CEO. So there's no issue in the company that is beyond the scope of what I do. And people know that, and they bring it to me, and it's up to me to find a resolution. Now, that resolution might not necessarily be me coming up with a brilliant idea to solve it, but it might be me bringing together the right parties and explaining the problem, with the right context, so that those parties are then able to work together towards that solution. So for me, it's the breadth of being able to tackle everything without looking at a problem and going, I wish I could do something about that, but that's somebody else's scope.
So that's funny, because that changes my second question. Usually the second question is, what would you change? But since you have the scope to change whatever you want, I'm gonna ask you, what is the smallest change that you can think of that had the biggest impact within your organization?
The smallest change that had the biggest impact. That's actually a really tricky one to answer, because coming back to always be tweaking, I'm never looking to put revolutions through the organization, right? For me, everything is an evolution. It's taking something, it's refining it, it's making it better, it's saying, right, how can we adapt this piece of it? How can we adapt that piece of it? what did we learn from that last change that we made? Did that actually make things worse rather than make things better? If so, what did we learn from that, and how do we recalibrate, and how do we then move again? So, I don't wake up in the morning and think, hey, I've come up with this great new grand plan, the theory of everything that's going to solve it all. I wake up in the morning and think, oh, I've come up with this great idea that's going to attack this tiny little problem over here. And that problem then links to this problem, which links to that, which then has an impact on that, which is going to drive this. And it's really that sort of that spider web, or that network of how all these little things fit together.
Okay. It wasn't the answer I was expecting, but it was very, I'm glad you answered it that way.
What was the answer you were expecting, Ramsey?
Maybe, hey, I decided to come in earlier at instead of at 9 o'clock, come in at 8:55, and it changed my entire day. I don't know. I guess I wasn't expecting anything specific, but I definitely wasn't expecting that.
Okay. Well, one small thing that I do every day, Ramsey, that I've been doing for a long time is I cycle to the office every day. I cycle here, I cycle home, and I find that time is really important to me, because it means that even if in that day I get no other exercise, I've at least had some activity. And I find that also it's a great way to sort of clear my head and have a whole bunch of thoughts. So I have thoughts that come to me while you're sort of in that autopilot of cycling that you don't have other ways. And there's other things that work for other people. For some people, that's going for a jog or a swim, or for some people, it's it's just a change of environment, or being in a particular place, or it might be sitting down and have a coffee in a cafe. But whatever pattern it is for people that allows them to sort of step out of their normal thoughts and think about things in a little bit more abstract way is crucial.
Nice.
Amazing. All right. So I guess for this next question, you have a we talked about it on the show a lot, or I guess pretty recently we talked about it on the show about one's impact radius within an organization. And you as a COO, just being able to impact pretty much everything within the organization, obviously you have quite a large one. Would you have any books or tools or resources that you'd recommend for anyone, whether they be an executive or not, to help them increase that impact radius, or even to help broaden their perspectives to be more effective in the role?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd certainly recommend the series of EOS books. So that's something that certainly helped me have more impact more systematically across the organization. So there's a whole series of books there, authored by Gino Wickman and some other collaborators. So the primary book in the series is called Traction, but then there's a whole range of other books as well that that sort of focus on various aspects of the EOS system. For those who are not so much a lover of reading business texts, they can go for Get a Grip, which is the fable version or the story version of EOS. So it enables you to sort of learn about the principles in it through a story that is presented there. So the reason why I found that to be very helpful is because it's not because there's anything earth-shattering in EOS. You're not going to come away from reading those books and thinking, wow, this is a whole new theory of management, because it's not. Right? What it does is it really pulls together pieces of other theories that other people have gone through before, draws on things like Jim Collins' Good to Great, and resources like that, but it puts them together in a very executable way. So often when people read a business text, they'll sort of read it and they'll go, oh, wow, that's, I've got all these great ideas and this is going to change the way I work. And then a few weeks later, they've really forgotten about it because there wasn't a way for them to then sort of easily incorporate it. People can be sort of quite resistant to that sort of change. With EOS, because it gives you that structure, it has a pulse to the organization. It has weekly level 10 meetings. It has quarterly planning sessions. It has a series of rocks that you're setting in between. And all the pieces sort of fit together to enable you to have a structure where everybody in the organization can have a voice. Every problem can be surfaced, and that dialogue is encouraged. So the ability for me as a COO, I could sit here and work 24 hours a day and not achieve my aims. Okay, because if I'm doing that and I'm trying to be the hero and solving everything myself, I'm not affecting any sort of systematic change to the organization. My measure of success is making everybody else in the organization better. and and enabling them to be able to be more effective in their roles. Because if I can, if through my leadership, everybody in the organization can become 5% more effective, then that is far more powerful than me making myself 50% more effective.
Totally. Love it. I appreciate that. We'll include links to each of those, or at least to the series, in our show notes. Thank you.
Sure.
So traction is kind of similar to the E-Myth, correct?
I'm not familiar with the E-Myth.
Okay. So I think it's kind of similar, where you have the visionary and you have the
integrator.
The integrator and how they work together. But I hear, so there's a podcast called the Bigger Pockets Podcast. It's about real estate, but every Sunday they have a leadership kind of podcast, and they talk about traction all the time. So it's I'm reading one book right now by Patrick Pisang, which is the social sales engineer, and traction is the book right after that, I guess. So
and and again, it wasn't traction that invented this concept of visionary integrator. Again, this is a concept they've borrowed from others. It was very natural for me to adopt it, because that first startup that I was working with, it had a visionary integrator. I spoke about how it was founded by a software engineer and a lawyer. One was the visionary, one was the integrator. And seeing that combination work together, seeing one person who was very focused, very technical, very nuts and bolts, and then somebody else who was very charismatic and strategic and thinking a long way ahead, and seeing how that worked together to go and create a new a dynamic in the organization that produced a lot of innovation, was very easy for me to relate to. So
this is making me think of like a salesperson SE, a good salesperson SE relationship, where the salesperson is the visionary and the SE is the integrator. So
yeah, absolutely. And so it's not just at the head of an organization that this works, right? And you often see it in teams, and anytime you hear somebody talk about the concept of a 2IC, that second in command, that this is my right-hand man or my right-hand woman, right? That whole notion that where you've got that tight team and those two people have complementary skills that enable that group, right? Whether that's just the level of an individual team, whether it's a division, whether it's a whole company, but that complementary skill of those two people bouncing off each other is crucial. So, you can see the whiteboard behind me that's covered in scribbles, right? This whiteboard is actually here for the visionary, right? This is for when Bill Fitzpatrick waltzes into my office and says, "Hey, I've been thinking, I've got this brand new idea. Let me tell you all about it." And he jumps up at the whiteboard and we talk it through. And those sessions are really invigorating, right? Because he's been out there, he's been future casting and looking at what's coming down the road. And then he wants to come and talk to me about, well, how does this change what we do at an execution level? How does this change what we can deliver for customers? How can we position ourselves in order to be able to deliver more value for our customers in that way? So it's our customers that are the beneficiaries of that. And it's me who gets the privilege of sort of sitting in the middle and taking those grand ideas that come waltzing through the door and end up on my whiteboard, and having the fantastic delivery team we have going and making it real for the customers. But in between, of course, you've got to have the sales and the pre-sales people who are then getting the customers to buy into that and seeing the value of those big ideas.
Nice. Okay. I think this is the longest time we spent on one question in the Not So Fire Round, and it's been great. Last question of the Not So Fire Round. Other than biking, is there a habit you're working on today to improve in your professional or personal life?
Being more reflective. So I have a tendency, one of my strengths is being very decisive, being able to make decisions quickly, being able to absorb large amounts of data. And sometimes, there can be a tendency to be blinded by that data and to not take into account everything that's sort of contextual and human around that. All right. So it's one of the things that I need to keep reminding myself, because it doesn't necessarily come naturally to me, that there are often other aspects that sit around that decision as well.
Nice. All right, Anthony, last question of the day. If people want to reach out and connect with you, where can they do that?
LinkedIn is the best way to do that. So yeah, they're more than welcome to send me a connection request there, and yeah, happy to have a chat.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Anthony, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ramsey and Benny. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope your listeners have gotten something out of it.
I'm sure they did. Thank you, Anthony, for coming on. This brings us to the end of the show. I am curious, for SEs out there, how do you feel you can bring the most value to your C level? I mean, we always talk about talking to customer C levels and VPs and directors from a customer perspective. How do we bring value up the chain for our own company? If you have any thoughts, please leave it in the comments, whether it's on LinkedIn, on the show notes for this page, which is wetheSalesEngineers.com/show 182. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you don't want to leave it publicly, reach out to me on LinkedIn, or my emails are ramsey@wetheSalesEngineers.com. That's it. That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoy the show, and I will talk to you next time. For the Invisible Benny, this is Ramsey signing off.